Hello, hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is your girl Mitzi, and this is Mitzi. Let's think about it. Today, I have a special guest, Jeff, here with me. Hi, Jeff. Say hello to
Hey,
everybody
Miss
who's
Mitzi.
listening. Awesome, awesome. We are going to be thinking about raising resilient kids. And let's be honest, as a parent, that's my goal. I want to raise a resilient children so that when they become an adult, they are a resilient adult. I think that is a lot of parents' goals when we have our children. But certain things happen along the way where we're like, oh, something messed up. You know what I mean? Or we don't know where to really begin for, especially for those new parents out there, So that's
Yeah.
why we have this topic so that we can really dive in and really think about this matter. So, Jeff, let's really dive in. What does raising a resilient kid mean to you? What do you think about when you hear that?
Sure. Well, first of all, Mitzi, thanks for having me. And yeah, let's think about it. And hopefully people come away from this with, more than just thinking about it and having some actionable items to pursue. A resilient kid is that kid that through enough tests at an early age reaches a point where in any situation that they encounter with strangers or peers, family members, teachers, coaches, neighbors, knows the right thing to do and does it reflexively. And that's the resilient kid because that resilience at age 7 is the resilience they'll have at 17 and 27.
Exactly. And I believe that because one thing I was taught is that what you teach your child when they're young, they'll hold on to it when they're an adult. And even becoming an adult and becoming a parent from child, when you go through that transition, you even realize and you can reflect back like, man, my parents were right. You know what I
Right.
mean? And you have those moments of realization. So I have to ask you, when did you realize your method of raising your children were working enough where you decided I could write a book about this?
Well, I didn't write the book until the last kid actually left to go to college.
Smart,
Uh,
smart. Make sure
yeah,
it works. Ground
I
foundation.
had I had just dropped him off at West Point, the United States Military Academy, and I had driven home from West Point, and I was sitting in my backyard with a cigar and a bunch of Red Bull, and I thought the third kid is launched. My other two kids were post college. They were one was in the Navy as a naval officer, having gone to the U.S. Naval Academy, and the other kid had gone to a school in New England called Williams, and he was also a naval officer. And I thought now's the time that I can actually talk about the lessons that I've learned through all this quarter century of parenting or 20 years of parenting. And, to bring up what you said earlier, you realize, what your parents said was probably the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Well, you that's really important because if you don't realize it, you've got a kid at 24 who's living in your basement playing Minecraft. Now that's harsh and that's hard to hear, but guess
Yeah.
what? There's plenty of parents who have that happening. Actually, it's about 41% of all the kids between the ages of 18 and 32.
Wow,
So
that's a big number.
that's right. So those decisions you make early on are essential. And as we talked about earlier, Mitzi, parents may not know this. 75% of the time a parent is going to spend with their child is spent by the time the kid is 12 years old. So if you don't pound those lessons home like your parents did and my parents did at an early age, you've you've lost that kid because by 18 it's 90% of the time you will spend with your kid has taken place.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. But I'm curious, do you think your military background has everything to do with the way that you structured your children?
I think a little bit does, but the military background when I was in the service in the Army Reserve, it also came from the example of my parents and all the peers and adults I was around, but it also came from involvement in sports, in athletics, because
Yeah.
sport, and the athletic metaphor is pretty easy because so many kids do play sports. But on a team, there's three things you learn. They're the most basic values in the human condition we have. You learn camaraderie. You're on a team and you have to get along with people, some of whom you don't even like, but you have to get along with them and you're pushing
Mhm.
towards a common goal. That second theme is adversity. At the end of a game, unlike any kind of aspect of life the kids go through, there's a scoreboard and there's a winner on it and there's a loser on it. And it's human nature to want to be on that winning side.
Yeah.
And if you're on the losing side, it's human nature to say, how can I reverse this? And that leads into the third thing is that if you want to get on the field, if you don't want to lose, you have to adopt that personal discipline to get better at whatever you're doing. And I will say that, yeah, the athletic metaphor, as I mentioned earlier, is easy, but this expands to anything: theater productions, the marching band, robotics club, the scouts, whatever brings together a group of kids with kind of a single goal in mind will build all those qualities in a kid that will last forever.
Yeah, I like that. And you know what? When you were speaking, what it sounds like to me, it comes down to structure. When you have
Yeah.
good
Yeah.
structure in your life and you attach that with accountability, honorability,
Yeah.
and self-discipline, you really are able to create someone who is well-minded. You know what I mean? And someone
Yeah.
who understands how to make decisions and that's what we want. We want more people in this world that are well-minded and are well-adjusted to know how to handle their emotions and when to react when the moment needs you to react. And like you said in sports, that's exactly what you need to do. You need to have that self-discipline. You need to have that instinct. You need to
Right.
have that observation to observe, to be silent, and to take into the moment. You know what I mean? Because imagine sports if they did not do that, how chaotic they would be. I'm pretty sure nobody would actually be watching them, or they would be
Right.
this big of a deal if they didn't work in that type of format. That is truly interesting.
I
That is,
like your I like your idea of structure. That's the perfect word because structure means routine and
yeah,
structure also means accountability because without accountability there is no structure. It collapses.
yeah,
And if you bring that routine and that structure early on, you're going to get that accountability. And then the more that your kid is trained, boy or girl, in being in that routine and having that accountability, the more solid they are in the long term. And it comes back to another athletic metaphor, it becomes muscle memory to
yeah.
always do the right thing, reflex. And, your idea of structure, boy, every parent has got to realize that from day one, because without structure, you've got chaos.
You really do. And I see it all the time. And I feel like a little scientist when it comes to my boys because they're still really young. They're 2 and 1 years old right now. And some days,
Whoa.
yeah, they're really tiny. They're really at that prime age of chaos. So some days I'm very structured and they go with it. And other days I'm like, "Ugh, I don't have the energy to be this structure myself." So I just like allow them to be in their chaos. And it's like, oh my goodness, this is ridiculous. But it just shows the
Yeah.
difference because even on their when they are chaotic, their energy level and the way they react and that emotional intelligence is completely drained. You know what I mean? I noticed that. And when they have that structure, they're able to be they make conscious decisions. You know what I mean? I'm able to see them
Yeah.
actually think at 2 and 1 years old when I have a certain structure because they expect that routine. You know what I mean? And it's so beautiful because people don't realize I don't have a military background. Like you said, you can do this without a military background. And I love how you
Oh,
said
yeah.
that. Like it was just like
Oh,
a
yeah.
percentage of it, but everything else that came to it helped you raise your kids. And I think a lot of parents don't realize that.
No, they don't. And I'll tell you one reason this is true, and is actually brought up by one of your podcast guests previous to this, Amir Sheikh,
Oh yeah.
was the absolute total overwhelming presence of social media in our lives and screens. Did you
Yeah.
know that kids up to the age of 5 view a tablet or a screen for 90 minutes a day. Now, that's not Nelligan, that's the CDC and the NIH
I believe it.
with those statistics. And from 5 on, it just accelerates. And by the time from 10 to 18, the time spent on a device is 8 hours and 47 minutes a day. And that doesn't include schoolwork. And
Exactly.
that's more time than a kid sleeps. And of course, it also begs the question, where the hell's the parent?
That's
Where
interesting.
is the parent when a kid is staring at a screen for 9 hours a day? My
That's very
gosh. And the your idea of structure is completely lost with the idea of a screen, because a screen is just this passive, infusion of things that require no thought and require no activity, both physical and mental. And so you give a kid a screen and there's no structure at all. It's the Wild West. And the idea that
exactly.
it's from the age of 2 to 5, you've got kids 90 minutes on a screen as a babysitter, and that's just the screen. The TV is another number altogether. It averages around an hour and a half a day.
Hmm.
That amount of just passive kind of taking in all the vulgarity and weirdness of the internet is something parents really have got to get a hold of. Otherwise, as I said, sounds harsh. 24 in the basement, getting real good at Call of Duty.
I know that's so true. But you know what's interesting is what I realized is that the parents who were able, and let's say, and I guess let me rewind, to go back. What I realized was that the people that were able to learn themselves and know themselves enough and are able to manage themselves and understand their triggers and you know what I mean, all everything about themselves, the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between, those type of individuals that had the time to have that space with themselves come more conscious parents that are more aware and how to deal with their children, and they're more patient.
Right.
And the parents that have not had the time to get to know themselves and understand themselves, and they're focused on the wrong things, they don't know how to handle their children because they don't know how to handle themselves. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And then what else I realize is that the reason why they push the tablets and phones onto the children is because they just want the noise to quiet. Instead of
Right.
resolving the noise and trying to figure out what's the problem, they don't rationalize, oh, problem, solution. No, the problem is the noise, stop the noise, and that's their solution. They don't understand deeper into the situation of, oh, maybe the child's hungry, maybe the child's dirty, maybe the child just wants some attention. You know what I mean? They don't understand
Right.
that. You know what I mean? So what I've realized, because I even have spoken with occupational therapists and behavioral analysis individuals, and they always said that they have problems with parents with that issue at 2 to 3 years old. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Even at 1 to 2, 3 years old. And it's interesting because the main reason for all of their answers is, oh, they cry, so I just give it to them. Okay, but they're not resolving the
Oh
situation. And I don't think
gosh.
parents do that. You know what I mean? They don't take that time. I
Do
feel
they
like
think
parents
they're the
fall in
first?
one or two things.
Do they think they're the first parents that ever had a kid cry?
I
Oh my
know.
goodness, and that's why I go back to the 12, 75% at 12. It's also, in one of your earlier podcasts too with Nadian, the HR guru, she was talking about emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
Emotional intelligence equals resilience. It's the same
Mhm.
kind of thought, the idea that you walk through life and no matter what happens to you, in the words of an old drill sergeant, you assess, you adapt, you advance. And when that is your response to anything that occurs, good or bad or inspirational, you're on solid footing,
Yeah.
And when I talk about bringing up kids like this, one of the examples in my book, Four Lessons from My Three Sons, is I got them early on in that mode of emotional intelligence slash resilience. We were at a big shopping mall indoor and, packed with people on a Saturday. And I yanked out my wallet and I took out three $5 bills and I handed one to each kid, 7, 6, and 4. And I said, go get the old man change. I said, this is not a race, but just walk around until you go into these stores and sometimes you might strike out, but come on back when you've got the change. I'll be right here. And off they went. And they came back and one kid had struck out at a store and then another kid had 20 quarters in his pocket, but they came back. Yeah, and they had completed a task that was completely unknown in a milieu of total strangers and in a strange place. And we did that again and again and again at different venues. And then it accelerated. We go to a restaurant and I'd look at the 6-year-old and I'd say, you memorize all of our orders and you tell the waiter or the waitress what we're having. And then the kid is 8 and I hand him an ATM card and I said, go get them. Here's my passcode. Go get the man 300, the old man $300. And he walks away, gets it, and comes back. These kind of, I never made an appointment on the phone for them. They always had to do it. Doctor, dentist, whatever, enrolling in a camp. These kind of tests build that resilience. They build that emotional intelligence, and they do it at a very young age so that they become so accustomed to these tests over the years that, when they're 27, when they're 24, and they're in the engine room as the chief engineer of a guided missile destroyer with $500 million worth of engines. They know exactly what to do when things get really, really dicey. And
Exactly.
then they pull it off when the lives of 250 guys on a ship are at stake. So that's the kind of muscle memory reflex that you can build, that any parent can do, just following those kind of small little steps when they're young.
See, and I think comes back to what I said earlier. Some adults can't even handle what you just said. Some adults
Right.
are
I know.
terrified to just go to the store, even having just another human contact. I remember one time, early years, working right out of high school at Taco Bell, just taking somebody was came to me. I was supposed to take their order, and the woman literally had a panic attack because this was her first time taking an order, and she was in her mid-20s. And in
Yeah.
my mind, I was just like, wow, this is sadly more common than not. And this is the reason why people have anxiety when they
Right.
have to just deal with another human being. And I honestly, sadly to say, I think people actually like the quarantine time during COVID because they restricted
Yeah.
themselves from actually having to have human contact. And now we have
Right.
all of these moderations. Now you really don't have to have human contact still on certain aspects of life. So it just guides people into a more sheltered, isolated perspective where you're not getting that emotional intelligence. You're not
Right.
working on it
And,
at all.
and you can't have a world of therapists out there helping adults. You know,
Yes.
I mean, at some point, the adult has to take control of themselves. And God forbid they've got kids who are going to grow up the same way. And then you have a whole generation of people that is shying away from human contact, which since the dawn of time is the only way to live. We're not
Yeah.
hermits, certainly where we live
Exactly.
to, where we live today in this kind of society. But
Yeah.
the point is, if you can you know teach that kind of behavior, it pays off dividends forever for your kid's life long after you're gone.
Exactly. And I think the sad thing is that people associate can't speak, emotional intelligence with struggles. You know what I mean? They feel like that's the only way they gain that emotional intelligence by going through difficult times in their lives. You know what I mean? And learning
uh,
from that lesson, if that makes sense. And sadly,
yeah.
it's like, no, if you just pay attention and just put yourself out there, then you can really work on that emotional intelligence without actually having to, you know, go bankrupt or to get fired from a job or to get by the cops or anything. You know what I'm saying? It's just it comes down to being aware and just having that awareness within yourself that something has to change as an adult, because once you are a parent, like you said earlier, it just ripples effect down to your children. And I think that's the reason why people are saying that there's so many generational curses. In reality, it's just generational bad habits. You know what I mean? Generational
I
bad
love that.
thinking.
I love the way you put that because they are bad habits, and they were, again, to use the word, accelerated by, just as you pointed out, COVID, the quarantine, the lockdowns, the isolation, the school closures, and they magnified all those traits, bad habits, as you put it, to what we have today. And you can look at any index of society and see those bad habits. You can see it in their physical health, their mental health, their confidence. And you've got a generation today, and this was, your HR people probably knew this on your previous podcast. You've got a generation today, and this is a study by Forbes and by intelligent.com, of HR individuals, more than 800, just like the ones you interviewed, about what they've encountered in the last 2 years with new college graduates coming out to apply for jobs. They note that 58% of those kids that are hired are fired within the first year. That
Yep.
70% of the people over the course of their hiring, the ones that stay, are persistently late to meetings.
Hmm.
That 22% of these kids who were interviewed, that's 1 in 5, for their first interview before an HR manager, brought their parents to the interview.
That's so
Yeah.
embarrassing. What?
22% bring their parents to the first interview. Now, what's going through someone's mind when that's the reflex, the bad habit of being sheltered all your life? That your first job interview, after your 6 years of college and your $38,000 worth of debt for a liberal arts degree, that you bring your parents to an interview and an HR person and bring them in the office. And the HR person is just sitting there absolutely aghast. And the parent is chiming in during questions that are asked of the kid. So
That
that's
is
what we can talk about this, but those are the real world numbers that come out of this isolation and this shyness, this lack of, let's say, as you note in your term, emotional intelligence. Those are the real world ramifications of all this.
exactly. It really is. That is so interesting. I'm so glad we had this conversation. Goodness, we had so many great points that I hope people realize that when it comes down to it, to raise resilient children, you have to be a resilient individual already.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Starts with you, and it ripples effects into your children, and then it ripples effects into your community, and it ripples effect into
Yeah.
your whole entire environment. And if you want your
Right.
environment to change, you want your community to change. So what are you really going to do with you? That really makes, people need to think about this. But I'm curious, what would you tell your younger self if you could tell your younger self anything? Out of all the things you could tell your younger self, what could you tell your younger self?
To have more humility.
Mm,
I think
interesting.
humility, is my definition of humility is power under control. And I wish I had had that as a younger person. And I still hope that I have it every day. I think about it constantly.
Yeah.
And that's something that I really wish I had early on. In terms of being a parent and a dad and a professional in Washington, D.C., I did well enough. And it wasn't a game stopper. But no one is ever, no one gets a free ride in life, and no one is perfect. In the book, I note, there's no such thing as the perfect kid. There's just the good kid. And the
Yeah.
good kid's always trying to be better. Well, if you're an adult, you're always got to be trying to be better as well. And so when you ask me that question, that's my kind of first answer and last answer. And it's something I continually work on.
I like that. I like humility because I think not a lot of people consider humility, especially in your younger years. You really don't. And that's one thing that I've been working on for years is to staying humble and to reminding myself that I can break just like anybody else can break, and just
Oh yeah.
just keeping grounded, not to get a high head of yourself because goodness, people could get into their ego and into their pride and the reality of you can have less or things can be worse is sadly the truth. You know what I mean? And
Right. Eh,
appreciation and gratitude goes such a long way. It saves
there you
relationships.
go.
It saves your future sometimes by just having that gratitude.
You know, Mitzi, that's the perfect follow upon to humility is the gratitude for what you have. And my gratitude extent. I've been in 95 countries in this world. I've been in every state. I have been everywhere. Okay, over the course of my political career, and
Mhm.
I'll tell you, I've come back from some of these countries, and it sticks with me today. I'm grateful to be able to turn on a faucet and have cold water run out of it. I'm grateful for a refrigerator. I'm grateful to walk in a Safeway supermarket and see enough food to feed a third world country for a couple days in one building. And that
Oh,
building's replicated throughout the zip code. So that gratitude factor, the smallest things, and then of course when you go to the bigger things, health, profession, faith, um,
yeah.
children growing up. When you say you have a 2 and a 1 year old boy, I can't tell you how jealous I am because I'd love to have that again. Just to see those two young human beings and be able to raise them and shape them into really strong, successful, caring human, men. Oh my gosh,
Mhm.
it's what talk about a gift.
I know
Gosh.
I'm very grateful and sometimes when I see my hard work pay off and I see
Yeah.
my the persistence that I choose to dedicate so that my boys can be that resilience and have that resilience and be great men and do great things and have that, feeling of that, like, oh, I don't know how to explain it, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like just to know that I can have that for my children is just I can die happy. You know what I mean? I can just
And
die happy knowing that.
I remember my two at 2 and 1, and then the third one coming along. And 2 years ago, at the graduation from West Point of my youngest, my two other sons were there in their uniforms. I had three sons there, pretty successful and strong and confident and alert and rugged. And I remembered when they were 2 and 1. I remembered vividly. So that's the payoff at the end. When you're standing there on a field in upstate New York on the Hudson River, and you're looking at these three guys, and you're just going, I remember when you were 4 and 3 and 1. I remember those
Mhm.
days. And man, think about that path that we've taken for all those years. It's the best feeling in the world. That's the gratitude.
Yeah, exactly. And just hearing you say it just makes me just eager and excited for when my
Good.
boys grow up and I get to have that moment too of those reflections. Goodness, this was such a good conversation, Jeff. We're gonna have to make another excuse to bring you
Sure.
back on my show. We're gonna have to find
Well,
another
thank you.
topic to bring you back on because this has such been a great time. And ladies and gentlemen, if you guys want to know more about Jeff and find his book, please check out his website. I have his lovely photo on my website. Just boop, just click right there, and you have all the access that Jeff has to offer to the world. So always, always, always keep thinking, y'all. Bye.
Bye.